Good morning. Thanks everyone for joining our webinar today, the fourth and final one in our Return to the Big Screen series. So it's less than 4 weeks to go before we can all eat our body weight in popcorn and make up for what we've really missed out on over the last year. Of course, drive-in cinemas have been open for just over a week now, and we'll hear more about this later on in the session from George. But the 17th of May is when cinemas open across England and Scotland. A week later in Northern Ireland, and we're still waiting to hear from Wales, but hopefully it will align with the rest of the UK. There's no doubt that it's been a tumultuous time for cinema and for the whole of our industry. But the future of our medium is looking more and more rosy, and it's not really just wishful thinking on my part, of course I would say that, but cinema is bouncing back all across the globe. And we all know that the cinema experience is not just about watching a film projected onto a big screen. It's so much more than that. It's about the communal experience that we feel, sharing emotions with others. It's the attention that we give to the film and the big screen, which is really second to none. And, you know, the pent-up demand is there. And, you know, we've been sort of in and out of lockdown over the last year, and the desire to return to cinema across the globe is strong. So if we look at what's been happening across the world, cinema is bouncing back. We know that in APAC, in China in particular, 90% of sites are open and admissions are back to pre-pandemic levels. It's a similar story in Japan. If we look at Australia, over the Easter weekend, in fact the Easter week, they had their highest weekly admissions since January 2020, so pre-COVID, and that's thanks to Godzilla vs Kong, Peter Rabbit 2. So the recent success of Godzilla vs Kong has just been amazing across the globe. It has now grossed just under $400 million, which has now surpassed Tenet as the #1 film in the pandemic era. You know, we're super excited, obviously, about cinemas reopening, and to get you all excited about cinemas starting to reopen their doors in the UK, we've gathered an illustrious panel of industry experts to share their views and knowledge about what to expect when cinemas open their doors. So, first up, I'd like to introduce all our speakers, and then we'll listen to each one in turn. After that, there will be a Q&A session, so we'll hopefully have about 10 minutes left for that at the end of this session. So please use the Q&A button and post your questions. If it's for a specific speaker, then please pop that in there too, so it will make it easier for Jamie, who will be moderating the Q&A session later on. So first up, and backed by popular demand, our first speaker is Sharon Reid, and she is the Director of Marketing and Partnerships at CinemaFirst, and we'll be hearing about the latest audience sentiment tracker. I've seen the headlines, it's really positive. Following Sharon, we'll have Morton, who, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but is a veteran of our industry, a veteran of the film industry, and is now the CEO of IM Marketing. So he'll be really whetting our appetite about the film slate that we've got, the amazing lineup that we've got to look forward to, and the importance of theatrical releases for the studios. And our third and final speaker is George Wood. So George is MD of Luna, and he was actually one of our founding outdoor partners. I think we're talking 15 years ago now, and really one of the true pioneers in this outdoor space. So George was actually on our first webinar where we were talking about drive-in and will it be successful. It has been incredibly successful. So he'll talk about the phenomenal rise of the outdoor experience in the UK. So that's it from me for now. I will now hand over to Sharon, who will take you through the research. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Claire, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to update you on the findings, as Claire said, of the recent tracking survey that was undertaken on behalf of the FDA by Metrics Lab. Many of you may have heard me speak before. I do speak, and we'll know that CinemaFirst has been tracking audience consumer tracking since the early days of lockdown, since in May last year. This current wave was commissioned as soon as the government announced the UK recovery plan out of lockdown and was fielded between the 15th and 21st of March. Next slide, please. So just a quick look at the methodology here. We polled a demographically representative group of 1,000 people covering the following segments. I'll just briefly read them out, just it's quite small there. So teens, aged 13 to 17, young adults, aged 18 to 24, established adults, aged 25 to 34, midlife adults, aged 35 to 54, and older adults aged 55 to 74, and parents with children who are aged between 4 and 12. In normal circumstances, we would have, all these respondents would have been cinema goers, and that means they would have attended a cinema at least twice in the previous 12 months. They participated in the survey, which was an online survey, probably taking between 15 and 20 minutes to complete. Next slide, please. So before delving into the detail of what we found, it's worth just saying what we wanted to understand from this tracking. We wanted to understand how cinema is perceived and ranked by the group as missed activity. We wanted to see and understand what their key concerns are and what those key concerns are amongst respective groups. And so by understanding what their concerns are, we could then have a better understanding of how we need to communicate with them to reassure them. And of those that did return when they were able, we wanted to understand what their experience was like to enable us to get a better understanding of what people really, really missed about the cinema experience. Next slide, please. So from wave one up to now, and there's a lot on this slide, so I will just draw your attention to a couple of key areas. We can see a surge in how much people miss specific range of activities. I'd like to draw your attention to the blue line, which is in the middle of this table, which actually relates to cinema. And what we see here is a near consistent level of how much people have missed cinema as an activity. In fact, this is the highest level of advocacy across the panel and is at the highest it's been since the pandemic, even though cinemas were actually only open for a relatively small amount of time in 2020. Cinema is behind activities like visiting friends and family and going to restaurants. But I think this kind of consistency of missing it is very promising for us as marketeers. In waves 5 and 6, when restrictions ease a little bit, some activities were missed a little less. But I think in line with what people are saying, that this particular lockdown, this winter lockdown, has been really quite tough on people. They found it quite hard to get through it. So it's probably not surprising that people have expressed missing cinema even more. I think also, missing cinema is 59% as sentiment, and it's actually a significant gap between other things like shopping or going to pubs or even going to the theatre. Next slide, please. We wanted to understand who the key groups are that missed it so that we can actually target them effectively when we relaunch our marketing plans. We can see 3 key demographics who miss cinemas the most. So those were teens at 69%, stating they miss cinema, a 10 percentage point up increase from the last wave, and that's only behind visiting friends and family. Adults in the 25 to 34-year-old category at 63%, a rise of 15 percentage points over the last wave, and parents at 60%, which has remained fairly constant across all the ways we've conducted. Next slide, please. So we've gained an understanding of how much people have missed cinema, but we also wanted to understand what urgency people felt about returning to cinema. I think this slide shows, although it doesn't actually say it, some really positive news here. If you look at the purple section to the left of the slide, there's been a sharp rise in cinema urgency. Previously, this was sitting at 29%, people saying they wanted to urgently come back, but now in this wave sitting at 41%. I think even better news that we saw a decrease in the number of people saying that they are unlikely to return. Previously, this has been at 10%, and it's now standing at 4% in this wave. Of those people that had previously expressed uncertainty about returning, we see a reduction here to 19% from 27. So more and more as we head towards that opening date of May the 17th, this is a much more pressing concern and focus for people. I think it's important as well to recognise there's still quite a lot of work to do. If you look at the dark blue area of the slide, so the yes later, that 36%, this is still a fairly large group of people who say they're keen to return, but are unsure as to when that will happen. I.e., it's soon, but not necessarily within a month of opening. So importantly, they're not rejecting cinema per se. I think as we go through, we'll see that there are actually some genuine concerns which are making people very cautious about that return and planning when that happens. Next slide, please. Just looking at the urgency, it's at its highest it's ever been in any of the tracking, and our core groups we highlighted previously, so our teens, our parents and the under 35 are really keen to get back, and there's a lot of impetus to get back to cinemas. So next slide, please. As Claire said, and as this slide I think endorses, you can't replicate the cinema experience. Cinema as an experience is incredibly important, and 61% of our panel agreed that it's it can only be had in a cinema environment, and this has remained fairly stable, this number, since the last wave executed in September last year. So despite the fact that there's been a significant trend in the last year for watching content at home, and this has grown massively, I think it's important to point out that this change in behaviour has detracted from the in-cinema experience, with the spectacular visuals, the immersive sound, great special effects, and actually the ability to watch new films on a huge screen in a state-of-the-art environment. These things have not diminished. I think it's also worth pointing out that people can differentiate between the in-home watching of a film and the at-cinema experience. And actually, if you look at these verbatims at the end of the slide, watching at home, yeah, you are more relaxed. You're not really losing yourself as you do if you're in the cinema. And actually, you get the ability to pause and talk whilst you're at home, which you don't in a cinema. You can be really locked in and immersed. I think that's what people really love. Next slide, please. So 1 in 5, or around a fifth of our people said that they returned to cinema when they were permitted to reopen last year. And although obviously cinemas were open for a brief period, they weren't open uniformly across all the UK territories. But we wanted to understand, who they were, and they were mainly people in the high affinity groups. And they missed, 37%. I missed going to the cinema. I wanted to see a newly released film. And as we know, last year we didn't have a massive number of newly released films. So people really went when they could. They took that opportunity. Next slide, please. So, what we want to understand why, what are the barriers that may inhibit people from returning quickly to their local cinema. So taking a deeper dive into potential barriers, we found that the top factor that our group cited was the wider public health factors. The public health situation. 41% stated it's about the level of COVID cases in their local areas, the national cases, the vaccine rollout, the trajectory of that, government announcements which seem to change every day. These have really affected how people, perceive the ability to make decisions to go to cinemas, and that's a top priority in all our key segments. After that, though, it's about understanding, and being aware of the in-cinema safety regulations and precautions that have been put in place. So 30% stated that safety regulations and stuff in cinemas was really important to them. So social distancing, the availability of hand sanitizer, staff having received training, the wearing of facial coverings, these are also important. So if we sort those first two bits, people then go on to then think about actually what will it be like in the cinema. And actually it'll be about partly the availability of new films. So 16% said that actually going back will be about seeing a film on the screen that they wanted to see that's going to be released. So last year, as I said, very few new releases, and we had an increased reliance on back catalogue titles. Next slide, please. So the cinema is currently considered to be one of the safest indoor entertainment activities. And we asked our group to poll on a scale of 1 to 10 how safe they thought a range of activities were. Unsurprisingly, outdoor activities were seen or perceived to be safer. And cinema in the middle there at 50% is just below indoor dining. But is significantly above other indoor entertainment activities like live sporting events or gigs, or even sitting indoors at the pub, although I'm sure many people last week would have wanted to sit indoors at the pub, given how cold it was when they reopened on Monday. Next slide, please. So overall public health, I think what this slide and what we learn from this slide is that people have a very high level of awareness what's happening locally and nationally. So they know about the number of cases, they know about the vaccines, they know about COVID variants, they know about surge testing, all terms we would never have been familiar with, let alone talk about them in everyday parlance. But importantly, public health is just as important as an individual's personal health. And I think there aren't too many surprises on this slide. On the left-hand side here, these are the essential things. What will make people feel more positive? Well, it will be when the cases start decreasing nationally, when the cases start decreasing locally, when you've got high levels of people in the population that have been vaccinated, and last but not least, when they have been vaccinated themselves. I don't think we should underestimate the effect on people of how bombarded they've been by the number of messages from government bodies and health officials. But for young people, i.e. those who are probably going to be later in line to get the vaccine, self-vaccination is less important at this point. It's about the general consensus about what's happening in the wider world. And I think this positive effect of getting all these things, all these elements in place, will drive younger audiences to come back to cinemas as soon as they can. Next slide, please. So what do people, what do you need to do in cinemas to, how would you rate them in terms of driving confidence of people to return? And I think really it's about that kind of proof and visibility of the measures that have been put in place in cinemas to safeguard guests. And I think if people can see it and feel it, we're going to get a higher level of reassurance and satisfaction. And on the left, you can see the things that people classified as essential. So, proof of social distancing, 74%. Hand sanitizers readily available in the cinemas, 71%. Effective ventilation, providing fresh air, 69%. And proof of social cleansing and sanitization measures, again, 69%. I think last year, cinemas invested heavily both in staff training and the implementation of rigorous safeguarding measures. I think our role, we know we did it, and the people that went back to cinemas experienced it. I think our role as we come out this time is to make sure we communicate this consistently and effectively across every channel. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we wanted to understand how people had felt about going back to cinema. And of those that returned, there was strong satisfaction with the overall experience. Of the people that returned between July and December last year, 87% rated the experience as good or very good. And 71% of the people that returned were very satisfied with the overall safety they felt within the cinema environment. Next slide, please. So, We as a sector have, and a group of people here, have a great role and a big role to play in delivering clear communications around, I think, the following areas. I think we need to communicate effectively that cinemas are open and are safe spaces to return to. I think we need to communicate that cinemas have deployed and will continue to be rigorous in deploying a wide range of safeguarding measures, which will in turn reassure cinema goers. And I think when we've done these reassurance and these communication elements about being open and about being safe, we will then be able to communicate the range of content that's due for release. And I know that Ian's going to take you through that very shortly. And actually that cinema is the best place to experience these amazing new releases. Next slide, please. So happily for many of you, this is the last slide. So I think what this poll, this current wave has shown us is that there are some real positives as we head towards reopening, and I think some genuine optimism about what we might expect from cinema goers. I think what to summarise though, people have missed cinema. They miss it now more than I think any other time in the pandemic. Our research has identified several key audiences who are ready to return almost immediately. Those with the teens, the family group, and the under 35s. I think we've shown that as things can improve in the wider social outside world, outside of your home, people will feel more confident about venturing out. Cinema is seen as being one of the safest indoor environments. Cinemas have deployed a wide range of safeguarding measures, but we need to communicate this widely and consistently to cinema goers to aid their return and to inspire confidence and to remind them of what we've done and that actually we haven't taken our foot off the pedal. And I think actually we as a group can take some optimism here that cinema is alive and well and will do well when we reopen. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Sorry, my sound keeps cutting out, so apologies if that happens. But that was really interesting. I mean, you summed it up really nicely. I mean, that we're looking forward to the audiences coming back. The teens, the families, the young adults, and the under 35s first. It's great that cinema's seen as the safest place to be, and that we've got a consistent number of people, consistent percentage saying that they're missing cinema. So that all bodes well, and now we'll find out from Ian what we do have to look forward to, and it is an amazing slate. So without further ado, I shall mute myself and hand over the reins to Ian. Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Sharon.
Good morning, everyone. As Claire mentioned, I'm Ian. I'm a veteran of the film industry. I was at 20th Century Fox for 20 years, and I looked after partnerships across all movies for international markets, and worked with Pearl and Dean for a number of years, looking at brand partnerships both on screen, off screen, in foyer. So very much best in the game. I feel Pearl and Dean have been a great partner of ours over the years. What I want to just mention here is this is just my view of films going forward. It's a real mixed bag of opinions, and it's from experience and research. But it is a really exciting slate. So it's just my personal view. What I would say in the last year, what's been really exciting is the film industry and the studios haven't been quiet. They've been really busy in the background working. I think one of the things I've been spending most of my time on is production. The amount of content being made in the UK for cinemas is immense. So there's going to be so much product moving forward. There's certainly not going to be a drought of films for the big screen. And also studios have been working throughout, and I do think there's been so much planning and preparation and thinking around movies. There's going to be some great marketing campaigns coming out of the studios moving forward. So I do think we're going to have some great campaigns and some great success. So I've just sort of split things into sort of different genres, and then I'm going to talk through some highlights. So Ian, can we go to the first slide? First one I've looked at is, action event movies. These are really the big admission drivers with a broad audience. And when you look at the numbers, 25% of the total UK box office is really within this genre. So it's a really, really important part of the business. And I think as we see those younger audiences, I think will be first out the gate. And we've got lots of films to excite them. First one to mention probably is Fast 9 on the 8th of July. That franchise has taken over 245 million at the UK box office. It's a really, really fun action movie you want to see on the big screen. I think it gives the industry a great opportunity for trailering to propel the rest of the slate for the rest of the year. I think Fast 9 is going to be a great movie. Following up on the 13th of August, is a film called Free Guy, which is it's a new property. It's from Sharon Levy, the director. A great director. And it's also Ryan Reynolds, and he's probably the best publicist of any movie. We know what he could do on social. So, it sort of feels like Deadpool meets The Truman Show in terms of tone, but it looks like a really fun movie. 17th of September, you've got Dune, which is the 1965 James Herbert sci-fi movie. Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya are the cast. A sophisticated sci-fi movie I think could be really interesting. And then probably the one the whole industry is waiting for is No Time to Die, 30th of September. Last Bond film took 95.2 million at the UK box office. It's just what's fantastic about Bond. It goes from 8-year-olds to 85-year-old grannies. It's everybody's going, and it really, really sort of invigorates the industry. So that's going to be a really, really big traffic driver. I'm really excited about Ghostbusters Afterlife. You should look up the trailer. It's a really fun one. It starts off and you think this isn't a Ghostbusters movie, and as the trailer goes on, suddenly there's some iconic Ghostbusters moments in it. It feels a lot younger now. It's 30 years later since the first movie, so it's a really interesting one. I think that's going to be quite a surprise. Top Gun Maverick. What else do you say? Tom Cruise, Miles Teller, and Val Kilmer are back. Again. Those flying sequences, you want to see those on the big screens with massive screens, loud sound, noise. I think it's going to be a really big event movie, and it's going to play to a broader audience, but I think everybody's going to want to go and see Top Gun on the big screen. Then at Christmas, 22nd of December, you've got the Kingsman franchises back. This is a sort of an origin story. It's set around the First World War, from director Matthew Vaughn, and he makes great movies for the big screen, and Ralph Fiennes is the lead character. Terrific movie for a broad audience. Then at the end of the year, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the last Matrix was around 20 years ago, and I think those special effects have to be seen on the big screen. It was mind-blowing when the original movie came out. Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss are back with the Matrix franchise at the end of the year, and I think that's going to be one you really want to see on the big screen. So that's only to the end of this year, and you can see there's some terrific broad audience action movies in there. Ian, next slide, please. Then, obviously, the superhero genre has been massive, and it's very, very dependable, and there's so many great franchises now. So just on here, you can see, in 2019, 223 million was taken at the UK box office around this genre. That Avengers Endgame opened to 43 million. It's just terrific numbers. And even, during, the pandemic and at Christmas, Wonder Woman took 1.1 million across 2 days. So there's a huge appetite. And I think this is the audience that are definitely going to be out in cinemas when we open in a few weeks' time. First up, for Marvel, the Black Widow movie. I think this is Scarlett Johansson playing Natasha Romanoff, and that's aka Black Widow. Also Florence Pugh and Rachel Weisz. I think it's got all hallmarks of obviously a Marvel movie, but it's great to have a female protagonist in there, so that could be very interesting. And then following that, Suicide Squad, which is James Gunn directing. He obviously Guardians of the Galaxy with Margot Robbie, Idris Elba, and Sylvester Stallone. So again, a great cast. And just looking at the views online of those trailers, massive. There's obviously a massive appetite. Shang-Chi, also from Marvel, that trailer launched yesterday, so I advise you to go and look online. Looks great fun. It's Marvel's first Asian superhero, so it'll be really interesting. Venom, so that's the sequel, Venom Let There Be Carnage, the Tom Hardy movie with Woody Harrelson, and it's directed by Andy Serkis, from Planet of the Apes, so could be a really interesting one. It's slightly more adult in terms of franchise, but I think it's got a really broad audience. Eternal's really interesting. So that's directed by Chloe Chow, who obviously is up for hopefully the best director for Nomadland. So that could be very interesting. So that's sort of a new Marvel franchise in November, and that's Angelina Jolie, Richard Madden, and Kit Harington in the cast. So again, I'm sure the Disney Marvel machine will make that into a massive new franchise for them, but it could be really exciting. Also in December, Spider-Man's back, and that franchise gets stronger and stronger. And I think Tom Holland's done a fantastic job on that Spider-Man franchise. It's very dependable and should do really well for everybody. Morbius is also in January. That's another Marvel franchise. Jared Leto is in that one. And finally, I must mention Batman, which I'm sure you've seen quite a lot of the production was happening in the UK. Directed by Matt Reeves, who did the Planet of the Apes franchise, a great director, and Robert Pattinson in that one. So, from the Batman movies to the Joker, they've all been fantastic. And, I think this will again have a new vision of the Batman brand. So really exciting for everybody. As we all know, the family audience is really, really important, and there's a whole wealth of family movies. This is my one joke of my slides. Obviously, Peter Rabbit 2 has been hopping around the schedule, but it's now landed on the 21st of May. Again, really, really fun. The last one did so well over the Easter period, but I think it's a really fun spring-summer title. James Corden is again the voice of Peter Rabbit. I think it could do really well, and it's a really strong family product. I'm so excited about Cruella on the 28th of May. 11 million views on YouTube for the trailer. Again, I really encourage you to go and have a look at the trailer. It looks really, really interesting. It's obviously the story of Cruella, the villain from 101 Dalmatians, but it really feels like it's got a fashion piece to it, and still very London focused. I think it's going to be a really big UK property. It's Cruella, but maybe there's a bit of Devil Wears Prada in there in terms of storytelling. It looks really interesting, and you've got obviously Emma Stone and Emma Thompson both in the movie. I think it's going to look fantastic, and I think it's going to be a family movie, but also I think it's going to be a film that women are going to go to without children. I think it's going to be very, very broad. Croods 2, 16th of July. Worked on the original. It's a really strong franchise. People love that story. It's really funny. Again, Emma Stone and Ryan Reynolds are voices. You really, it's very dependable DreamWorks product. Should be really good fun. Space Jam, A New Legacy. This is a Warner Brothers movie in the summer. Honestly, back in the day, I'm sure many of you, like me, are veterans, remember the original Space Jam. But it's got the Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, Tasmanian Devil. It's got all of those fun characters that you remember and you've grown up with. So I think that's going to be a really, really fun one. Just moving quickly forward, Hotel Transylvania is in the summer. This is the 4th movie in that series. Adam Sandler and Selena Gomez are voices in that one. Again, pretty dependable and really fun. Jungle Cruise is also in the summer. I think this is really a really fun one. This is a Dwayne Johnson, Emily Blunt, Jack Whitehall movie. It's to me, it feels like Pirates of the Caribbean meets Jumanji meets Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's that sort of traditional fun family movie, and I think it's going to be a real adventure. I think families again, but I think it's much broader than that. It looks great fun. It looks quite comedic as well. I think it's one of those films I always say to people: is a big popcorn, a big Coke, and sit down and have a really nice couple of hours. I think you're going to really enjoy Jungle Cruise. Half-term, no-brainer, Addams Family 2, animated movie, Halloween. It's a slam dunk for box office. You're going to that one, so that's an easy one. And also in October, there's a film called Ron's Gone Wrong, which is from Locksmith Animation. It's a really cute story about a boy and his B-bot, his computer, his robot essentially. And it's from Locksmith Animation, which are a UK-based animation studio. And so I think there'll be lots of attention on that one in the UK. It's a really beautiful story. But just looking there, you can look family entertainment movies. 354 million at the UK box office in 2019, so it's really strong, and we've got plenty in there to satisfy those appetites. Ian, next slide. Really interesting, a genre that really has sort of grown over the last few years. It went through a time when it wasn't really that big, is musicals, and I think when you get a musical right, it plays and plays and plays, and weeks and weeks of box office and repeat visits, and people go in large groups. In here in 2018, obviously Mamma Mia and Bohemian Rhapsody took over 118 million at the UK box office. But also, I have to mention The Greatest Showman. That was such a huge success, and it opened and just played and played and played, and the music grew. So it's a really, really interesting one. If we get it right, you have some really good box office figures. In the summer, you have Cinderella. I think that's a very well-known franchise, and obviously Camila Cabello is in the movie, as is Idina Menzel. I think that's going to play, female, quite broad. Hopefully there'll be some big songs out of that, but that can be well established as a strong female title. In the Heights, really interesting. This is Lin-Manuel Miranda's movie, and the show was fantastic. I saw it when it was in London. Obviously, he's the man behind Hamilton. A really, really strong story. A very Latin American audience will really like this one as well. I was reading the internet buzz is really, really strong on this one. People who have seen it, they've just released the social reviews. It's through the roof, and it feels very summary. It's going to have the credibility to get the musical audience there. I think it's going to play younger and broader, and kids and teens are going to go to this movie because it's such an uplifting, and it looks very cool. And then in September, a film called Respect, was obviously the story of Aretha Franklin, played by the amazing Jennifer Hudson. So I think that could be a really fun one. I think the reviews will be through the roof, and a real traffic driver. Dear Evan Hansen, 24th of September. This is from the writers of The Greatest Showman, so Pasek and Paul. So you're going to have great songs in there. It's already a really popular brand. It was a big success on Broadway. And it's already open in London. I think that'll play to the theatre audience, but also younger. I think there's a real fan base with teens. Ben Platt plays the lead. He won the Tony Award, and Amy Adams is also in it. But I think that'll be a really interesting movie and should play really well. And finally, in December, I have to mention the amazing West Side Story, releasing 10th of December. West Side Story, probably the greatest musical of all time, the story of Romeo and Juliet, and Steven Spielberg directing. I think we should all put money on Oscars right at this point. I think it's going to be an amazing title. Okay, next slide, Ian. Also, horror movies, great for in cinema, and it's one of the most popular genres, especially to the 15 to 34-year-olds. So it's a really strong one and a great one to get to an audience, if that's your target. The one I want to mention is A Quiet Place, because I think that was such an amazing in-theatre experience, because it was so quiet and people were so scared, and you wanted to see that film together. And I think that really shows, how horror works in cinemas and how it's important to see a horror film all together. So some of the key highlights coming in the horror genre, you have Spiral, which is from the Saw franchise, on the 17th of May, another Conjuring movie on the 28th of May, and these are all really good they open well at the box office, and you can guarantee the audience. As I mentioned, you've got A Quiet Place Part 2 coming, and that was a massive UK box office and global box office. So it's a well-renowned franchise now. The Night House with Rebecca Hall, looks like a horror / thriller. It sort of reminds me a little bit of What Lies Beneath in terms of positioning, but that looks quite interesting. Also in August, you have Candyman. I mean, again, you probably remember that from back in the day, but that could be a really great franchise reinvention. Halloween in October, Halloween Kills. The last one did so well. 255 million at the global box office, but obviously Jamie Lee Curtis is back, and again it's around the Halloween period, so it could be really, really strong. And then really excited in January, Scream is back, so that is in January. If you look at the media coverage around Scream, really, really strong. When you see in the Mail online, everybody's talking about shots of the film being made and behind the scenes, that there's an appetite and interest in that brand, and obviously Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, and are all back in the movie, so a lot of the original cast are in it. So lots of strong horror movies in there, which is really going to drive audiences. Ian, next slide. Okay, so this is my last slide, and this is the tips for the award season. Again, I haven't seen any of these movies, but just give you an idea of what is being talked about. You know, I know obviously Pell and Dean have the Everyman Group, and obviously these movies are really important for some of those cinemas. So just a few to mention. Stillwater is Tom McCarthy, the director of Spotlight, and Matt Damon. You know, it sounds like a really good pairing for Oscar hopeful. The Eyes of Tammy Faye is about the tele-evangelist Tammy Faye Baker, with Jessica Chastain starring. That sounds like could be really interesting. You know, a performance award there, I would have thought. House of Gucci, which is in November, Ridley Scott directing. And you've got Lady Gaga, who's sort of straight out of A Star Is Born, obviously, Adam Driver, Al Pacino, and Salma Hayek. So star-driven, really great story, great director, could be very interesting. Nightmare Alley is Del Toro's follow-up to The Shape of Water. Obviously, he won the Oscar for that. Could be amazing. Bradley Cooper, William Dafoe, Toni Collette, Cate Blanchett. You know, the visuals, you know, if you go online, look beautiful. I think that could be very interesting, and, you know, guaranteed award winner, and you know, very, very sophisticated, wide audience. Wes Anderson's back this year, still to be dated with The French Dispatch. You know, Wes, you know, you can guarantee his audience, you know, it could be very interesting. Frances McDormand is also in this movie, which is a really, obviously, star at her pinnacle, with Tilda Swinton, Bill Murray, Owen Wilson, Adrian Brody. So Wes Anderson cast, you know, amazing cast, eccentric, but really enjoyable, has this firm fan base. And Benedetta is, you know, Paul Verhoeven, a movie which seems to be jumping into festivals around the world. Not dated yet, but could be sort of just through that one, and that could be quite interesting. So that is my whistle-stop roundup of what I think could be interesting in the next few months.
Thanks so much, Ian. Just grappling with the mute as ever on these things. There's just so much content. It's quite overwhelming. I mean, loads of way too many to sort of pick out all the highlights. But yeah, for me, there's a couple that I'm really keen to see. House of Gucci, In the Heights. I think Cruella and It's Got to Be Top Gun, but you know, it's great news for our industry that we've just got such amazing content coming down the line. So thanks so much for that, Ian. And I know there's a few questions been posted in the chat for you later, so we'll get you back on screen in a while. But we'll now hand over to George at Luna to hear about the phenomena that is outdoor cinema and drive-in. So thanks for joining us, George, and over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Good morning, everybody. As Claire said, I'm George Wood. I run the Luna Cinema. We started 12 years ago as an outdoor cinema, and I would normally introduce myself as we're the country's biggest outdoor cinema and pop-up cinema. And these days, I have to remember to say also drive-in cinema, because since I came on the first Pearl and Dean webinar a year ago, that's really been the focus of what we've been doing. We moved into drive-in cinema, and I'm the first to admit, purely in reaction to the pandemic. It was never part of the master plan. I never thought that we would be doing drive-in cinema, but I'll tell you about how it's gone, because it's been really interesting. So I'll quickly tell you a bit about what we do, because the concept of the Luna Cinema is even more prevalent today, because we've all had a year of sitting room cinema where we've sat in our front rooms and pretended that we're back in the cinema. And of course, we've heard from what Sharon has said and what Ian's just said, that those films that we're all excited to see again need to be seen back on the big screen. And our belief, what really underpinned what we set out to do all those years ago now, is that it's the belief that the space you're in to consume the film is as important as the film itself. And I don't know about you all, but yeah, this last year of sitting room cinema has only strengthened that belief for me. And it's interesting. Sometimes it's the ones that, I can give you a million examples. Sat in the gardens of Hampton Court Palace or the courtyard of Warwick Castle. These unique spaces where watching your favourite film in those locations just is an experience. And it's an odd experience. It just works. But sometimes it's the ones that you don't expect. It's the Birds at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, or I was thinking about the Dark Knight at the Houses of Parliament, Gladiator at Cardiff Castle, whatever it is. It brings out something in the way you watch a film that is different, and it makes you revisit films in different ways. The number of times people have said to me, I've seen that film a million times, but tonight I feel like I've seen it in a whole new way. And you get that all the time with what we do, and it's the thing that I love most about what we do. And you know how you find yourself watching films that you've seen before, and you're waiting for your certain usual bits that you look out for, usually your favourite scene or the famous iconic line or whatever. That all changes when you're in our form of event cinema, and I think it's down to the presence of the audience. Obviously, the thing we've all been missing for the last 12 months, the presence of the audience, which is odd because when you go to a normal cinema, a fixed location black box cinema, you almost tend to block out the fact that there are other people there, and you pretend they're not there. Whereas at an outdoor cinema, you're so conscious of the presence of the other audience members, and that's what makes it a communal shared experience. And you can see on the picture there, that's Hampton Court Palace. The audience around you steer you into a new and unexpected direction, and the audience at an open air cinema behave strangely. They behave like a collective audience. They laugh, they gasp, they cheer, far more than in a normal indoor cinema environment. And it's odd, it's in a very natural way. It's because I believe there's no roof. So the audience have this sense of freedom in how they respond to the film. And it's not contrived. It's we've not asked them to think of a character to come in or to come in a themed costume, as much fun as that can sometimes be. They're just experiencing the film in a different way. And that's ultimately all about the power of, I believe, the big screen and great filmmaking, of course. And still to this day, I mean, you see that image there, that's Lincoln Castle. We would show a film like Some Like It Hot, which was filmed 70 years ago, and 1,000 people at the same time will erupt into laughter as that final scene plays. And it just shows you that you can't replace the big screen, and there's nothing like a great film as well. In terms of where we're at today, so since I did that first webinar with Pearl and Dean and said, look, we're going to move into drive-in, who knows how it's going to go, that's what we've been focusing on. And as you've heard this morning from Sharon, the audiences are ready to return. So in terms of where we go next, Ian has shown us that the films are ready and waiting. My belief, and what I want to really talk about, is that there is a great bright future just around the corner. We've just got to get through this last little spell. The success of the vaccine rollout is obviously key, because breaking the link between the infections and the mortality is the key. Once things open up again, of course there might be more transmission of the virus, but hopefully it won't be killing the vulnerable people in the way it was last year. And suddenly we can all, I say we, the collective film fans out there, we can all make valued decisions about the risk involved. Do I want to go back to the cinema? How much have I missed the cinema in relation to the risk of catching COVID? And we can start making really rational decisions about, actually, I really have missed cinema and I really do want to go back, and I can't wait to get back to the big screen experience. And I know and Sharon's data supports this, of course, there's a certain demographic who might take a bit of time to readjust. But because, look, it has been a long period of time, and some people might take a while, but I'm confident that just as with going to the pub last week, old habits reform very quickly, and all cinema actually needs is what Ian's told us it's got, which is a supply of brilliantly interesting films that can't be watched anywhere else. In the meantime, what about this summer? So you can see there, Warwick Castle, Greece on the big screen. We've got our biggest season of outdoor cinema planned, and look, we can't wait to get back to that, because we know there's a pent-up demand for out-of-home experiences, particularly obviously in the open air. But look, any form of big screen cinema, the pent-up demand we know is there. But first, at this very minute, it's obviously all about drive-in. So we were given the date of the 12th of April by the government. So on that day, we opened drive-in cinema, and it was drive-in really that saved us in 2020. And now I can speak with that bit of hindsight. It really did. We had absolutely no clue as to how long COVID would last. And I'm the first to admit that when that I was totally wrong about drive-in cinema. I'd actively avoided it for 12 years. Every time I was offered the chance to do drive-in, I'd say, oh, it's not really for us. The audience feels so distant. There's no kind of collective communal thing that I was speaking about a few minutes ago. And actually, how wrong I was. Drive-in works incredibly well as a form of cinema. And it's actually, I'll tell you what works about it, is that it's so different to going to a normal cinema, but also it's so different to going to a Luna open air screening. It really works, I believe, now that I've done it, and you can see there in that blurb that we did over 550 screenings last year right across the country. And the reason why it works is that it fuses a nostalgia and a novelty, which of course when you think about drive-in, everyone goes to Danny Zuko in Greece, probably, or it's 1950s, 1960s Americana. It fuses that rose-tinted nostalgia with 21st century technology, and that is the key. That drive-in has found its place, oddly because of the pandemic, but it's found its place because these days the technology is there. So the way that we did it, you can see actually in that image, is that we developed an in-car speaker that gave you incredible in-car surround sound. Basically, we knew we had high definition screens. We very quickly adopted license plate recognition cameras so we could do away with ticket scanning. And we developed a web-based app, which meant that people could order food and drink really easily from their cars, very safely in a socially distanced way. But it was really the development of that in-car speaker that gave me the confidence to say, we can put the Luna brand on this and we can be proud of this as a form of cinema, because the sound was always the thing that was bugging me. If you run it through an FM frequency, it sounds nice, it sounds romantic. In reality, the car turns itself off to save its battery, as modern cars do. So we kept thinking, we can't do that. We don't want to put our name to that. So working in partnership with our sound company, you can see it there, they developed a battery powered wireless speaker, goes on the dashboard. It can be sanitized between each screening. And you can see on the front is a QR code that you scan, which brings up the menu. Equally, that is a touch screen, so you can read about the film, you can see what's playing next week. And it really was that piece of 21st century technology kit that for me made drive-in work, and has meant that it's not something to get me through 2020, which was obviously on paper going to be a disastrous year. It's become far more than that. It's given us a form of cinema that can exist in a time of year when open air cinema probably can't because of the weather in this country. So drive-in hopefully will carry on post-pandemic is what I believe. Interestingly, the web-based app for the ordering of food and drink, when we first launched drive-in, it was about this time last year, and I was saying, well, we don't know what the uptake of food and drink is going to be like. We've not done this before. We had 12 years to finesse open air cinema. We've had 2 weeks, it felt like, to do drive-in cinema. So I rang up the Germans, because obviously they were ahead of us as always, and the big drive-in cinemas in Frankfurt and Dusseldorf were running at full capacity. I said to them, how does it work with food and drink? And they said, oh, you just turn on your hazard lights and someone comes and takes your order. They were reporting to me that 35% uptake was typical, and that's what we should expect. We opened a few weeks later to 91% uptake. Every single person, and obviously you've got to remember, we'd all sat in our homes and cooked dinners at home for months by this point, so no wonder they all wanted food and drink out of home, but 91% of people all ordered food and drink at the same time. So it was partly we learned on the job. We found out that food and drink to the vehicle is a key part of the driving experience. You can see there, that's Nebworth House, which, I mean, all these venues were desperate for us to go there and take any event that could run in a this kind of COVID-19 secure way, and so it worked phenomenally well. We ran over 550 screenings last year, the length and breadth of the country, and it literally saved us. I look back on it now, as you can imagine, with that tiny bit of perspective that this third painful lockdown has given us, and I think to myself, thank goodness we did it. It allowed us to continue after 12 years of growing our little business, to keep afloat, to keep employing our dedicated little team. And I genuinely remember that decision in April of 2020, that point where I had to make the decision between, do you hunker down and cut costs right back and keep your head down and hope that the storm will blow over in time for a normal lunar summer season to come along, or should we invest a load of money in launching a Luna drive-in brand that will hopefully enable us to trade again in a more obviously COVID secure way? But God, I mean, it felt like a real decision. Ploughing any money into creating something new at that point was surely the definition of insanity, or extreme recklessness, at the very least, when other business owners were probably busy working out how long they could last if they ran down their reserves. But we didn't. With hindsight, it was 100% the right thing to do, and I'm so glad we did it, because it gave us a focus. It allowed the Luna brand to keep present, for us to keep talking about new things, because crikey, there's nothing worse when you're a dynamic little offshoot from the broader cinema industry than being dormant for a year and having nothing to say to your engaged customers for other than we'll be back and we'll see you on the other side, hopefully. Of course, Crucially, though, it allowed us to keep running the business. We didn't know back then, when I had to make that decision, that we'd be turned down for every Arts Council round of funding for not being a cultural offering, and equally that the BFI's recovery fund for cinemas would be limited in its eligibility by the presence of bricks and mortar. Who would have thought it? So we received a grand total of 0 in recovery funding. So thank goodness we worked our little asses off and got driving up and running in 2020 with a bit of determination and innovation. Since, you can imagine, I've written to the BFI and explained that the next time they have to define what a cinema is in a global pandemic, that the core characteristic surely for eligibility should be, does the business derive its principal operating revenue from the exhibition of film, rather than does it have bricks and mortar? But hey, look, it was driving that got us through it, and I'm proud of the fact that it did. And long may it continue. I genuinely do think that drive-in has found its niche, oddly, through the pandemic in this country, and that it will continue all the time that people want it. So in terms of onwards and upwards, in our bid to do our bit to try and get things back and the wider industry open up again, you might have heard that we've agreed to be part of the government's event recovery programme. So this is 3 screenings that the Luna Cinema is going to be staging in Liverpool, where the data gathered at these events will provide the scientific evidence to support the government's release of lockdown. Those dates that are all probably ingrained in all of our minds, 17th of May, 21st of June, we all know what those dates are in there, and that the justification for reopening at full capacity, which is obviously what we need, and I keep banging on about this whenever I'm talking about it, because full capacity is so important to us, because not only does it make it commercially viable for businesses like ours, but also you get the atmosphere right. You have to have a critical mass of people there in order for an event to feel right. So we're delighted to be part of these events, because we all know that at every stage there's going to have to be some form of scientific backbone data to support the reopening. So if these events can do that and can help gather that information, then look, great, we'll be part of it. And having done over 100 open air screenings last year, eventually off the back of driving, we did manage to get some open air screenings out with social distancing. We're of course supremely confident that the data gathered from open air cinema will do what everybody on this webinar, I hope, will be wanting, which is that things can reopen this summer and return to normal this summer for all those great films that Ian has told us about. There was obviously a bit of backlash in the press, as people might have heard, about the vaccine passport, and in truth that was a really annoying sidetrack, because actually these test events have got nothing to do with the vaccine passport. Every attendee of the government's pilot test events will have to take a lateral flow test, and it's the negative test result that will allow you into the event, regardless of your vaccine status. So, but look, we all know that these are strange times and people are sat at home. There's keyboard warriors out there wanting to protest about anything. So unfortunately, we were accused of taking part in vaccine passports, which is actually nothing to do with what we're doing. What we're really trying to do is get the events industry and the cinema industry back up and running at full capacity as soon as possible, which is what I know we all want. So in terms of my hopes for the next step, look, I think what we can take from what everyone said today is how positive the next chapter is, hopefully. I don't know about anyone that's had COVID, but I was thinking about it this morning, likening it to that the first meal back after my taste buds returned. It was like a taste sensation. My partner Beck was suddenly the best cook in London, and I sat there with my taste buds going into a frenzy after weeks of zero taste. And look, all I can say is that I hope the same thing happens when we return to arts and culture, the big screen again. Having been starved of theatre, cinema, music, and all the things that we love doing for so long now, I just hope that all of our senses are on high alert and that we all fall back in love again with cinema when we can.
Thank you so much, George. That's great to hear about the success. I'll just hand over to Jamie, and maybe we can just do a couple of questions, Jamie, before we say goodbye.
Yeah, well, I'll
Thank
keep it to one question per person. So I'll start with Sharon, and I've just formed them into to try and do it as one question if possible. So there's a lot of questioning around social distancing measures within cinemas, obviously with people going back to pubs and restaurants, there's that as well. But for social distancing cinemas, when that might end, and when communicating that safety measures within cinemas to the general public, how is this being taken on? Is it going to be by the exhibitors, by CinemaFirst, distributors, and also how do we address? Is that how we're going to address the reluctant audiences returning to cinema?
Well, that was quite a big question, Jamie. Thank you. My gosh. So quick ramble. So I think in terms of the first part, when do we think social distancing might end in cinemas? I think actually, I'm going to sound a bit like Chris Chitty here. I think actually whatever this new normal is, as we emerge, we will have remnants of social distancing and enhanced measures in place for maybe, I don't know, maybe the end of the year, who knows, and wearing facial coverings and whatever. It's hard to say. I think as we reopen, I think one of our concerns is to, we did a great job last year in terms of social distancing measures and contactless payments. And I suppose we just want to know whether there'll be any additional requirements from the government as we go into reopening. There's no indication there will be, but we need to be prepared that there could be. So I think that's the first thing. In terms of communicating, I think we have to be consistent and get the message out in every channel. So I think CinemaFirst will be communicating. We will be launching a Back to Cinema campaign, the sequel, sometime in the next few weeks. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that, but we will be, and safeguarding something we cannot ignore. So that would be part and parcel. I think all our exhibitor partners will also be doing, as they did last time, a lot of communication on measures in place, and we will also, as part of our first activity, be deploying work through our PR agency to make sure we get the message out through influencers and others. Was there another part of that question, Jamie?
No, I think that was part of it, is obviously getting the reluctant audiences back. So I think CinemaFirst doing a campaign will help with that. Fantastic, thank you. A question for Ian. So as you've known, over the last year or so, the distributors have obviously gone to PVOD and so forth, and Warner Brothers in 2022 are returning to exclusive theatrical releases. Do you think others will follow that trend?
It's a really hard one. I think every business has their own, concerns. I think what I would say, I think cinemas are great. I think there's lots of cinematic movies coming, and I think if cinemas offer a great experience, I think the industry will support cinemas.
Thank you. And finally, last question for George. I think this has come after the backlash of anti-vaxxers in Liverpool, as I'm sure you're aware of. Do you see any further backlash from anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine activists for outdoor cinema, obviously in your arena?
I genuinely don't. Interestingly, as often with these things, it's a handful of people with extreme views that make a lot of noise on social media, as I'm sure we all know. And the truth is that it was really unfortunate, because the government's press release that went out that mentioned vaccine passports at the same time as the event recovery program, these pilot events, actually just confused the public, if I'm honest. So look, it confused people because it made them think that this was going to be the introduction of how things were going to be forever. And actually, that's not the case at all. What this is a series of events, the data from which will be used to support the reopening at full capacity. So my key point that I keep wanting to stress to people is that this summer, when the Luna Cinema puts on screenings at Hampton Court Palace and Westminster Abbey and all those great venues we're going to be at, that's not how we're going to be operating. What we want to be operating with is people being able to enjoy open air spaces at a safe distance, where they can actually actually distance themselves from those who they want to get as close or not as close to as the case may be, but that we can return to full capacity. And it's by doing these 3 events in Liverpool in support of the event recovery programme that the data will be there to support that. So I don't anticipate any backlash, because I think that actually the broader British public are fully in favour of a return for entertainment, for all those things that we mentioned that we've been starved of for the last year. People are genuinely ready to get back to this now, and anything that we can do to support that, I think we should all do and collectively be, get behind. So no, I'm remarkably positive, despite the fact I've had a few keyboard warriors accusing medical apartheid or whatever else they accused us of.
Great stuff. Thanks, George. There are a number of other questions, but we'll take a note of them all and reply to them via LinkedIn and other platforms, so you can get an answer around stuff such as our lunar launching in Scotland and so forth. So we'll get back to you on all of those when we can.
Great. So thanks, Jamie. Thanks again to Ian, George and Sharon for sharing all your great knowledge and insights and your time. And thank you to everyone for listening as well. Thanks to Ian and Jenny for driving the presentation too. So thanks again, and see you in the cinema.